Good morning, everyone. Our guest today is Arielle Roth, Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications and Information and Administrator of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. She was confirmed last July and has arguably the fullest plate of any telecom policy official in Washington right now. She's implementing the largest spectrum pipeline in American history under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, overseeing the $42.5 billion BEAD broadband.
He just he froze. Scott, are you still there?
As a wireline advisor to Commissioner Mike O'Rielly. Administrator Roth, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Scott, for having me. It's so great to be here. I follow TPI's work closely. It's been incredibly helpful to me in my career. I'm a frequent listener of Two Think Minimum, so thanks so much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you for those kind words. I feel like maybe we should just stop now after you endorsed us. But for everyone, before we start, for everyone watching, if you have questions, type them into the Q&A box, and we'll get to them. So the first question, which I alluded to in the introduction, is that you helped draft the law that you now have to implement. That's kind of unusual. So what looks different from the implementation side that you maybe didn't really fully appreciate when you were writing the legislation?
Well, thanks, Scott. What a privilege to have had both the opportunity to work on the underlying legislation as well as the process of implementing the spectrum pipeline in the OB3. We identified, as you said, the largest spectrum pipeline in American history, 800 megahertz. NTIA has to identify 500 megahertz of it. We're working all hands on deck to get that done within this administration, and if possible, beat the deadlines. There are certainly, it's certainly been eye-opening to me seeing the other side of it, going from staffer to the executive branch. Sometimes when I was a staffer, I think I had more of an impatient kind of approach to spectrum identification, like, let's just identify the spectrum.
Right.
And, because we all know that American leadership on next generation connectivity is going to require more spectrum. And so something that's been, I think, recognized at the highest levels of the administration. So getting things done expeditiously is really critical. At the same time, in some of the bands that we're looking at, you have critical safety of life systems that need to get, relocated or compressed. In some cases, we don't have the spectrum specifications of the new systems that the agencies are going to have to purchase. And so you have this puzzle that NTIA has to work out. And that's really the basis of the studying that we're currently doing, figuring out where we're going to, relocate those federal systems so that we don't compromise federal missions, and really getting that done at the outset is critical, because then how much spectrum can be realistically or credibly identified, and you have then more certainty in the auction, and ultimately a better auction results and a better outcome for the American people. Other things that I've found interesting are sometimes when I think I came into this role with it would seem to me like it's self-evident that an agency should purchase spectrally efficient systems, and then when you're on the other side of it, you also become aware of other pressures that agencies are under in terms of timelines and in terms of costs. And so trying to it's a complicated process working with the other agencies, but I'm really confident that we're going to get this done expeditiously.
So you're saying you realize that they face other pressures, and spectral efficiency is just one of the things they consider, and maybe don't have the right incentives to focus on one thing more than another through no fault of their own necessarily.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, um, I think that's one of the things I've been thinking about is how to increase those incentives so that we have a more spectrally efficient um, environment to begin with.
So let's talk about this. The spectrum math, I guess, and this huge problem or challenge that you have. Um, so you announced four bands to study, and then identified your first 5 megahertz from the L band. Now, first, what really does it mean to say you've identified a band? What should the market take from that? What should all the various players in the market take from you saying that you've identified a band? What does it mean?
Yeah, so um, we are we're currently under a shot clock to identify 500 megahertz of spectrum. Um, we uh, we identified, meaning we highlighted, we announced four bands that we're looking at to get to the 500 megahertz. The the spectrum in the L band that you identified, 1675 to 1695. We actually sent a letter to Commissioner to Chairman Carr, formally identifying that first 5 megahertz kind of down payment on the pipeline. That was just last week, and we're eager to identify the rest. We're currently studying the other bands that we announced to comprise our pipeline target. So that's 4.4 to 4.94, and 2.7 to 2.9 gigahertz, and 7.125 to 7.4. Some of the bands are at different stages than others. 7 gigahertz is further along. That's because that band already has funds available from the Spectrum Relocation Fund. We also are currently what we're currently doing is moving forward on studies in the rest of the bands, 2.7 to 2.9 and 4.4 to 4.94. And so we're those bands aren't going to be far behind, but because the agencies need to have their adequate resources through this SRF to do those studies efficiently and effectively. And there's a sense of urgency to meet and even exceed the timeline set by Congress. So we're at work across all of the bands, all across the board. And then once we do our identification, then there's a process on the FCC side. But ultimately, we're all working together so that we can get these bands identified and auctioned as soon as possible. A clear priority for this administration, so that the U.S. leads in next generation wireless connectivity.
I mean, this seems like an enormous challenge. You mentioned the different bands, and with a 4.4 to 4.94 gigahertz band has, I think, 15 federal incumbents. The 2.7 to 2.9 gigahertz band has NOAA and the FAA, and the 7 gigahertz band, I believe, is a fight between licensed and shared still. Those are all difficult issues to work through. And you said you've made the most progress on 7, I think. How do you think about how to order these different bands? Because as many things as I've seen you do simultaneously, that's a lot of things to do simultaneously. And so which comes first? Or how do you think about how to order those?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're, as I said, we're working on all of the bands simultaneously. Um, we're currently under an obligation under the presidential memorandum to identify spectrum in the 7 gigahertz band um, by the end of the year. So that's one additional shot clock that we're under. I think that just goes to show how much of a priority this is for the president and the administration, particularly as we go into prepare for the 2027 World Radio Communication Conference with strong domestic policies are going to also are going to assist us, I think, internationally. But again, as I would just I would just echo that we are pushing our engineers and are expediting our identifications of key bands. And I'm very confident that we're going to get the job done before the end of the administration. As I said, also the part of the work is done on the FCC side, and so um, you know the part of the timing of the auctions is going to be up to the FCC.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like in terms of sequencing, some of it is based on how complicated the challenges in the given band, and some are just completely external. That you're under pressures for certain bands that are different from pressures for other bands.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. As you said, there are 15 different agencies that um, are incumbents in the 4 gigahertz band. But I think we're still confident. DOJ is the second largest user in that band and has shown willingness to work with us to move it forward. We have the 2.7 to 2.9 gigahertz. There's only two federal incumbents, one of which is in our building, NOAA. DOT is very eager to work with us to identify spectrum in that band. It's the other incumbent. That being said, NOAA has critical safety of life systems in the band, and so we need to work out the puzzle in order to identify the spectrum that I referenced earlier to ensure that we have as much certainty on the front end so that the auction is as successful as possible.
So this is a little bit of an aside, but does it matter that Noah's in the same building? Can you just go talk to people? Does it work that way ever?
Yeah, I have a great relationship with the NOAA administrator Neil Jacobs. We had a great meeting last year, and I definitely think it helps. I mean, that being said, we do work very closely with DOT on and the FAA on multiple spectrum issues from 2.7 to 2.9, as well as C-band. We represent the federal agencies through the IRAC process with respect to proceedings at the FCC that affects that federal equities. So I would say that that's something that we are certainly prioritizing. I think having good relationships with the federal incumbents is really critical. We're having lots of productive discussions, and I'm feeling very confident about our ability to move forward on all the bands that we announced.
So you said before that when you were on the Hill, you would just wonder, why can't they just be more spectrally efficient? And I know that was a little bit tongue in cheek, but do you find now that when you interact with other people outside, let's say outside of the government, that they don't understand how difficult the balancing process is? There's a question somebody asked in the Q&A here. And does that affect the way you have to think about it?
No, it's a good question. Well, given that I admittedly didn't, I think, fully appreciate or realize some of you know, the challenges on this side um, of this side of the government. Like I'll give you one example. We to for agencies to get access to funds through the Spectrum Relocation Fund, there's a 60-day mandatory notification to Congress. Um, there might there it's possible that there processes to get that waive, but it's not as that's not as straightforward as it's not like you flip a switch and can just do that. So that's just one example where you there are challenges that you experience in getting to that identification stage. We're working on it. I think our federal partners, I've said this before, have understand that this is a priority of the administration. We saw that both in the president's leadership in getting OB3 over the finish line, as well as the presidential memorandum at the end of last year on 6G. This is a big priority for the administration, and we're working through these challenges together. But again, while at the same time ensuring that critical emissions are protected and that auctions are ultimately as smooth as possible, and that you don't see some of the back end challenges that we've seen in the past and would want to prevent.
So in the past, an obstacle has often been that too many players have veto power, not called that, but they could stop the process. And it's a little bit different this time. Congress rejected giving DoD certification authority over spectrum reallocation. And I think one law firm basically described that as saying no agency gets a veto. I don't know if that's too strong or not. But on the other hand, the law gives the president the authority to withdraw any frequency on national security grounds up to 60 days before an auction. And obviously, if the president says you can't use this band, then probably you just can't use that band. But does that affect the way you think about the band studies and how to move forward? Are you concerned at all about that happening? And do you try to work to prevent it? Not in any secret way, just making sure that the plans are likely to be acceptable.
I think that having an open dialogue with our federal partners, working things out through the IRAC process is the best way to ensure that you don't have those types of disagreements that require, the White House to have to, make a choice or resolve a dispute. And I also think that what this president has done, which is issue that decisive presidential memorandum last December, it really sent a strong signal to the agencies regarding how these studies and identification are to proceed. And I think that's really been a huge asset to our ability to move expeditiously.
So you've actually said in the past, you've said something consistent with that you've seen a sea change, is how you put it, in how federal agencies approach spectrum. So what do you mean by that? I guess is it, do you say, is it sort of a cultural shift? Was it the presidential memorandum that, sort of forced them to rethink the way they think about it? Tell us more about that and how it's affecting the process.
I think that what, when you have different agencies in across the government that have, their own equities when it comes to spectrum. And sometimes there are you know, incumbent companies that, have an interest in pushing the agencies to pursue the status quo. I think, definitely there have been, everyone knows that there has been tension between expanding commercial spectrum access and, the defense industry and the Department of War in the past. When I say that I see there's been a sea change, what I'm really referring to is that, there's been a recognition, I believe, in the last few years, and maybe this came from, when we saw that, that FCC Spectrum Authority had lapsed, and what a loss that was for American spectrum leadership. Our military strength depends on our leadership and strength when it comes to commercial spectrum innovation. We're currently engaged in a global technology war that's not just, that's fought from both a traditional military means, but as well as a war over digital dominance. I talked about this in a speech at the Media Institute. I think it was last week or the previous one. There are just massive opportunity costs for us from a national security perspective when it comes to when it comes to spectrum underutilization. Spectrum is the canvas for our technology innovation, whether it's AI driven 6G or our dominance when it comes to commercial space. It's absolutely critical from a national security perspective that we are dominant in these areas. We want to be dominant technologically, and also just our military even relies on commercial off-the-shelf technology like radios, drones, civilian networks, private 5G networks. And we want to be at the frontier of technology, we don't want to be following our adversaries, particularly when our adversaries have shown an intent of shown an intent to centralize or impose censorship or surveillance on these networks. And
so are you sorry to interrupt, but
okay.
So you're saying that that the agencies, you believe, are kind of internalizing what they perceive as the effects of a slowdown in bringing new commercial spectrum on the market because it was hindering hindering innovation that then they would use. I mean, that's seems to give them a lot of credit in what they think of as their incentives.
Yeah, I mean, I think we still have a ways to go, but I've had discussions with the Department of War, the intelligence community. I think that they do have, I think that there's been a realization of what a risk it is if we are not the leaders in the next generation networks in 6G, and how that isn't just confined to the telecom industry. It affects their equities as well.
So actually that brings us to WRC 27. Somebody also actually just asked a question about that too. So the US is, I guess, maybe having some difficulties in putting together a consensus. And the FCC Advisory Committee couldn't reach consensus on agenda item 1.7. So what do you have to resolve before the CTEL meeting in April? Like, how do you prepare for that?
No, thank you. I think, this ties back to what our previous discussion of the importance of American technological dominance. And so much of that is tied to our leadership at standard setting bodies, which is something that the Trump administration has prioritized. It was, as was clear in the presidential memorandum at the end of the year, as well as in NTIA's own priorities. I attended a 3GPP meeting last fall. We are working with our federal agencies around the clock to get to go into CTEL and ultimately WRC with strong positions, so that and building support in order so that we can build support with internationally and ultimately have our positions drive the outcomes at WRC and not those of our adversaries. So we're currently, working, as you said, with the FCC, as well as the White House and the State Department to develop those positions. I think we've started early. We recognize the gravity of falling behind, and so I think that there has been a very strong commitment to ensuring that we do dominate at WRC, especially when I know you mentioned agenda item 1.7, but WRC 27 is going to be very satellite heavy,
right?
And commercial space is an area that America dominates in and must continue to dominate in, especially given that 6G networks are projected to feature a key feature is projected to be the seamless integration of terrestrial and non-terrestrial networks. NTIA actually recently announced training sessions with the U.S. Telecommunications Training Institute in both Africa and DC to promote regulatory environments to support satellite connectivity, with respect to spectrum policy and market access. But those trainings are also going to be a helpful avenue to build a coalition of foreign partners that support U.S. positions at WRC 27.
So it seems like a problem with WRC 27, an inherent problem that you're sort of tasked with solving, is that it's set up for a system of incentives that doesn't exist. I mean, they're really the idea of a U.S. position, and for many other countries too, I don't think makes sense at all. We have all kinds of industries and technologies competing with each other, which is a good thing. I think competition's good, but it makes your job impossible. So how do you handle that?
I mean, I think that, okay, so that's definitely an important point. I mean, you have some items where you're going to see tensions between the terrestrial providers and the satellite providers, particularly on items related to direct to device. Then tensions between the LEO mega constellations and incumbents. Then you also, I mean, I don't think we have this as much, but this is going to be more of a theme at WRC, is the tension between countries that want to restrict what they call unauthorized satellite transmissions versus, more of a global free market for satellite connectivity. You have these are tensions that are going to need to be resolved. I think that ultimately the focus needs to be on what's best for America, and getting our partners. They're not no one's going to get every single thing they want, but ultimately that's why we have this process. Other countries, not all our adversaries, don't do that. I mean, I think you have it when you're able to just set what the policy is, that's a much easier process to come up with with positions, we have more of a negotiation. But ultimately, everyone's the ultimate goal here is to do what's good for America and American technology leadership. And
Do you think that puts the U.S. at a disadvantage in these kinds of meetings in WRC in particular? Because I mean, it's also wrong to say that China is just a single entity with one set of incentives, but it's easier for them, like you implied, to have a single position than it is for us. I mean, that makes it difficult for us, but does that make it a disadvantage? Put us at a disadvantage?
I would never say that America's free and democratic way of life puts us at a disadvantage. It definitely creates more challenges in a multilateral setting like this to achieve positions and consensus. But I think I would think that having that technical analysis as well as negotiation that we're currently doing, I think will ultimately set us up for success.
Let's talk about BEAD a little bit. So you've made BEAD technology neutral, which I think is awesome. And states are making good on that. But some are including are building on CBRS spectrum. But the FCC has an open rulemaking on CBRS that could change the rules of the band. How are you coordinating with the FCC on that to make sure that BEAD subgrantees aren't investing in networks where the underlying spectrum rules might shift?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Obviously, we want to make sure that BEAD as successful as possible. That has been our a huge priority for us, ensuring that BEAD is successful. We see successful projects. We don't see defaults in the program. That has been our guiding principle across so many of the decisions we've made, from asking questions when it comes to projects that are excessively expensive to ensuring that subgrantees have the financial and managerial capacity to deliver on their promises. Enforcing matching requirements, strictly enforcing matching requirements has also been another way we've done that. Of course, working with the FCC on spectrum matters is deeply affects speed. I mean, we definitely saw that in our work with the FCC to approve the SpaceX Gen 2 V3 application. We led the federal coordination of that effort. A critical effort to promote American leadership in commercial space that also deeply affects speed and the ability of SpaceX to deliver on the commitments that it made to in projects where it won, to states where in projects where it won. And so I would say that it's the same. It would be the same issue. It would be the same process in any spectrum proceeding that affects federal agencies, including NTIA's own equities. So I think we work very closely with the FCC, including on proceedings like CBRS. And I would expect that if there were any concern regarding BEAD projects, that would certainly be something that we would discuss with the FCC.
So are you saying that so far no states or potential bidders have come to you to express concerns about this? I mean, these are huge investments that they
Yeah,
hope to make.
yeah, absolutely. And we definitely we pursued an all of the above technology solution in the BEAD program, um, where we have a substantial number of um, fixed wireless winners, um, including winners um, uh, that use CBRS. I haven't heard um, I haven't heard much in the way of concern
Mm-hmm.
um, about BEAD, but it's definitely something that we would be sure to monitor.
Mhm. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about your op-ed that's in today's Wall Street Journal, which everyone should read because it's interesting and also it's a great read. Although I'm not sure how I feel about reading about walking in the snow again after it just melted. But you said you found that DC's remaining list of unserved sites included a shed and a non-existent building and an open field that each was asking for, or not asking for, but each was slated for about $70,000. Um, Now, NTIA has approved, I think, 50 of 56 final proposals. Given this high error rate in DC, how confident are you that the remaining location data that states are using is reliable enough to inform those final decisions?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have, as I mentioned, been I think exercised very strong, rigorous oversight over the program um, to ensure that taxpayer dollars are spent responsibly. Um, as for those who didn't read the piece yet, um, so yesterday I published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that kind of gave a case study um, of where our oversight efforts were able to stop waste in the millions of dollars of waste in the program before it started. We had seen in the previous administration really astronomically costly projects approved, projects exceeding $100,000 per location, really very distortionary costs that really were impossible to explain to a normal tax-paying American. Um, and we saw some red. So when Washington D.C., every state was allocated in the law, a certain amount of money based on their um, unserved locations. Um, and DC was allocated a little bit over $100 million as a result of that. Um, it's just, when you think of DC, it's such a broadband saturated jurisdiction. There are so many, we live here. We know there are, multiple major providers that serve DC. It's not like a rural area where you really have a challenging business case in building out last mile connectivity. And so when DC came to us with a project that was $70,000 per location, that just set off alarm bells. Like, how could this possibly be so expensive in an area like DC? And that was we had before DC submitted its final proposal, we told DC, you have to go back and look back at this and figure out, this is not an acceptable cost to impose on American taxpayers. And so just a few days later, they came back with the same provider, the same locations, the same technology, but the price had dropped 90% to about $6,000 a location. And, so we thought to ourselves, how does that make any sense? Where would that delta have gone if we didn't ask questions? And so, we needed to just, this was super sketchy. So we also know, and we also know that, DC, as I said, very saturated with broadband. Did these locations even need a subsidy at all? Were they truly unserved? As we know that in 2023, Senator Cruz and the Senate Commerce Committee came out with a report that showed that some of the a large number of the locations that were considered unserved in DC were actually in the National Zoo, and so given that
Well,
history,
the adoption rate by the animals in the zoo is very, very
yeah,
low.
totally. Um, Given that history, you would think that the district would have done its due diligence, but we really had to press them to go back and look at these locations, and then they ultimately said, okay, no, we have 6 unserved locations that truly need a subsidy, and new build out, and so we were like, okay, we're right in DC. We're gonna go and figure out whether that's actually true or not. And so we took out just 2 hours of our day, and visited the sites, and it turned out that not a single one of them was unserved, and many of them were not legitimate serviceable locations at all. One was an open field, one was a shed on the train tracks in Northeast DC. One was, not even existent along those same train tracks. And so the conclusion was that DC did not require broadband deployment dollars, and thus their final proposal I approved at $0. I think that it was a great example of the importance of oversight and the importance of asking questions. Things that the federal government needs to investigate things that don't pass the smell test. That's certainly been a priority of this administration under President Trump and Secretary Lutnick, and we certainly have been pursuing those same principles across the BEAD program.
So do you have some, like, an algorithm that you use to identify potentially suspect locations? Maybe, I mean, it would be great if you could take the time to walk around the entire country, and that sounds like a lot of fun, but probably not a great use of your time. So, are you concerned that what you saw in DC is representative, and how can you go about just checking that?
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to be funding hay bales, or we don't want to be funding not open fields. There's always no map is going to be perfect. The FCC's map is based on a location fabric. I know that some companies have done a lot of work to remove non-legitimate non-serviceable locations from the fabric. The FCC has a challenge process. We have representatives across all the states that have, and we've worked with the state broadband offices to work with them to remove locations that don't need subsidies. At the same time, and providers are not allowed to accept a subsidy for a location that's not serviceable. So if they were to do that, they would face enforcement penalties, which is something that I think we've made clear. But that's not to say it isn't a challenge, and I think we're doing as much possible diligence as we can. But this is a joint effort. The states have to do their part to reconcile locations as well, and then providers as well need to ensure that are going to be in the process of deploying their BEAD networks, are going to have to recalibrate pursuing to the actual facts on the ground.
So another big issue with BEAD right now is the $21 billion in savings that Secretary Lutnick mentioned. And you've been very careful to say that you haven't made a decision yet on what what will happen with that, and that you need time to think about it. And you've had listening sessions, and people have proposed all kinds of things, ranging from next generation 911 to returning the money to the Treasury. And you're stuck in the middle with probably everybody telling you that their proposal is what America needs. How do you have a framework for evaluating different ideas? Because you're really stuck in a difficult situation.
Yeah, I think it's pretty unusual to have, the original allocation of BEAD was $42.45 billion. We were able to complete the deployment of the BEAD program in about half that amount while still ensuring universal broadband availability. And so we're left with $21 billion. And, I think it is pretty unusual to have, such a large amount of money, and so many different ideas on how to spend that money. I think what I would say, and this is something I think I've said before, is that, I think that in approaching this money, NTIA and the Department of Commerce want to ensure that it's responsibly spent. And it's so much money. And if you don't get it right, that can lead to really harmful consequences, not just in terms of wasting taxpayer money, because that's bad, but also distortionary outcomes. And so what I've said is that I think we want to ensure that any use of the funding is outcome driven, delivers real, meaningful outcomes for American taxpayers, with real that measured against performance metrics. Because you can spend money but not actually accomplish anything. So having those outcomes, Secretary Lutnick is extremely outcome driven, and I think ensuring that those outcomes are clear at the is very critical.
Is anything off the table? Like returning the money to the Treasury, for example, is that not an option, or other things that people may have proposed that just don't seem realistic?
So I think that my understanding is that that the money is going to be, we're proceeding with the assumption that the funding is going to be spent. Returning it to the Treasury would require rescission. And so not something that we could do without an act of Congress. Mm-hmm. I think we're again against those principles that I was outlining. Ensuring that the funding is outcome driven. Against this is something that that TPI has been very influential on. Just the importance of having performance metrics. It's so important to evaluate programs. It's easier, with BEAD, it's easier because you have, that binary question of, did we achieve service in this area or not? And so here it's a little bit more challenging when you have so many ideas for how to spend the money. We just want to get this right. That's really critical to this administration. We don't want to just throw money out the door and waste it. It's just not fair to American taxpayers, especially when you're dealing with so much money.
That's
the
really...
potential. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And the potential for both wasteful and distortionary consequences.
I mean, you're making a really interesting point that it's hard to spend money well if you don't know what you're supposed to spend it on. If you're not given a particular objective that you're supposed to maximize. And I don't know that um, agencies are really ever put in that explicit a situation. Um, I don't know how you get it right because there's nothing to get. I mean, you've been given no criteria to get right.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think we're very intent on following the law. I think
Sure, right.
following the law is critical. So I wouldn't say that there's no limitations
You
on
are correct.
on
Yes.
what the agency can do. Um, getting it, that's very critical. Um, definitely want to ensure that we minimize opportunities for waste, fraud, and abuse, like we did throughout the BEAD program. Um, and so, that's why I think why it was so helpful to have that listening session. Um, we had a ton of participation. There's just a ton of interest in this, and it also underscores why we really need to do our due diligence, like we've done throughout BEAD, and get it right.
So I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this, but as an economist, I can't let it go. That the law requires you now to publish, I think, biennial reports on federal spectrum valuations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the whole reason that we sort of have tried to introduce market mechanisms in the past is that we don't know how to sort of put values on spectrum ourselves. And I mean, we try all kinds of ways. I've written papers on it too. But you've got some bands that are for national security. That you've got to think about how to value weather radar, how to value what is commercial use. How are you going to do this? And do you think this exercise can will cause agencies to change the way they think about what they're holding by seeing the opportunity cost of their spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the underlying
Mhm.
the underlying idea behind doing that kind of evaluation. Having that data is, you know, provides transparency and clarity to policymakers when it comes to spectrum allocation. But as you said, that they're implementing it can be complicated because now we have to there are also different types of spectrum. There are different ways we utilize spectrum. um we would um the the value of different types of uses, whether it be licensed use, shared use, unlicensed use, um, you know, satellite use. We now have the emergence of new technologies like direct to cell, which we actually haven't talked about. But
Right.
it's going to be a challenging exercise, but I think it's ultimately going to be um, a worthwhile exercise.
I mean,
Um,
the law is asking you to um, come up with methods and techniques that we haven't even developed. I mean, you've got non-market uses, national defense, and which
mhm.
are obviously really important, but we don't know how to put a value on. There's constant arguments about licensed versus unlicensed versus shared, with all kinds of different approaches for doing it. Um, it seems like you're going to be at the center of both uh, kind of intellectual debates uh, and some of the same kind of industry debates that we see now that haven't yet yielded really good answers.
That's right. I mean, I think we have some very challenging work ahead of us. Um, but I think we've never shied away from a challenge. We have, whether it be with respect to, BEAD or identification of spectrum or, evaluation of spectrum. I think these are really important conversations to have. I think as an economist, wouldn't you say that we can put a value on everything, or is
Well, I'd
that,
say that we'd like to try.
yeah, so like to try to put a value on everything. So I think it's the details of that are very complicated, but um I think it's a really, I would think it's a very valuable exercise,
I think it's
and
very exciting,
something
actually.
that'll
So
also help us, I think, with our identification of spectrum. I would think that they're absolutely tied together.
yeah, I have no idea what the answers are. I think it's really exciting that you've got to try to do it. So just one last question, and sort of going back to what we started with at the beginning. You've now seen spectrum policy from just about every possible angle. Um, what one thing do you wish the spectrum policy community understood better about what NTIA does?
No, I think that I think what maybe I could, you know, just return to the point that I made about how eye-opening it's been on this side of the government. Um, Maybe I could just give a shout out to the incredibly talented and dedicated professionals I work with, including Chuck Cooper, the head of Office of Spectrum Management, uh, Derek Clopin, Lenny McGrath, some of them that they work closely with, and just how I guess I would just say that I would say that sometimes, we also have information that, um, and this was so frustrating to me when I was a staffer and I didn't have, you know, the same kind of, clearances. Um, this is about solving a puzzle, um, and 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 there's always information that others on the outside aren't going to have. That's kind of one of the challenges, also of spectrum policy is ensuring that, information is shared with those who need it, so that decisions can be made. Because the last thing that you want is new information that you aren't aware of at the last minute that delays a delays policy making in this area. And so, I would say that, um, that those on the outside, I would say, um, there are some incredibly talented professionals working on this. It's very challenging, and you know, ultimately, working together to achieve U.S. Technology leadership is something that NTIA is, fully dedicated to, and 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 you know I think, it's something that I've been very privileged to witness firsthand. And I would encourage others to do the same. Come work at NTIA and see it for yourselves.
I think that's a really great note to end on. It. The people who work on these issues, NTIA and the FCC, they know the issues so deeply and so well, that we learned a lot from that. So Arielle, thank you so much for talking with me. It's great talking to somebody who's so knowledgeable on so many of these issues. Um, and good luck with everything. Huge challenge.
Thank you so much, Scott. It was great to chat with you, and thanks for TPI's great work
Thank
that
you.
that has been so helpful to me throughout my career.
Thank you.